heard that sometimes when people hear the word racist or racism, that can be very stressful. So I thought I would take a time today and try to find a less stressful way for you to think about racism or about being racist, so that maybe after this video, the next time something like this happens, we can trigger some tingles instead of white fragility. So this is Racism Without Racists, Colorblind Racism and Racial Inequality in Contemporary America by Eduardo Bonilla Silva. So what we're going to do is we're going to read a couple of brief excerpts today and just kind of get the general gist of what Bonilla Silva is talking about. Sound good? Okay, good. So we are going to start at Chapter 2, The Central Frames of Colorblind Racism, and this is on page 25. There's a lot of references because he is a very well-known scholar. So Chapter 2, The Central Frames of Colorblind Racism. So we're not going to read the whole chapter because that would take too long, but we're going to pick out his 4 central frames of colorblind racism, and we're going to give an example of each one. And just to be clear, Bonilla Silva's book is not supposed to be here for you to find racists, but rather to identify certain rhetoric that people use, everyday people, that carries racial ideas underneath it, even though we might not necessarily think of it or them as racist. So ideologies are about meaning in the source of power, in the service of power, They are expressions at the symbolic level of the fact of dominance. As such, the ideologies of the powerful are central in the production and reinforcement of the status quo. So this is his methodology right here. And what he's doing is analyzing interviews with college students, DAS respondents, and trying to identify patterns in what people are saying that might map on to a larger structure of colorblind racism, which for Bonilla Silva we can think of as racism that's not necessarily explicit, but implicit. Racism from people who can claim that they're not racists. So these are the 4 frames. We got abstract liberalism, naturalization, cultural racism, and minimization of racism. And we're going to go through each one of these. So abstract liberalism, what is this? So abstract liberalism involves using ideas associated with political liberalism, like equal opportunity, and economic liberalism, like choice, individualism, in an abstract manner to explain racial matters. So we can think of this, for example, maybe with affirmative action, where the abstract liberalism frame would come out when we think, well, it's important to have racial fairness, to have racial equality, but is it really fair if we're taking into account race in admissions? This would be an abstract, liberal kind of rhetoric because it's taking the language of liberalism and using it against liberal policy. The second frame is naturalization. It's a frame that allows whites to explain away racial phenomena by suggesting that they are natural occurrences. Naturalization. So this, we might think of it as saying, well, segregation is totally normal, it's natural, it was always going to happen, because people naturally tend to gravitate towards other people that are like them, so it's not really a problem. If we took this out of race and into another frame, we could think of naturalization as the reason why people might say that women aren't in STEM as much as men, and people might say it's because women naturally have less of an interest or aptitude for STEM. So this is taking existing social inequality and explaining it away as natural. This third frame, cultural racism, is a frame that relies on culturally based arguments such as Mexicans do not put much emphasis on education, or blacks have too many babies, to explain the standing of minorities in society. So this is probably the most explicit form of racism, and the form of racism that white liberals would be most likely to call racism, although sometimes they still fail. And then this fourth frame, minimization of racism, is a frame that suggests discrimination is no longer a central factor affecting minorities' life chances. So it's better than in the past, or there is discrimination, but there are still plenty of jobs out there. Maybe we can think of this frame as the Barack Obama frame of colorblind racism, where we've had a black president, so it can't be that bad anymore. That's minimization of racism. Let's try to find a couple of examples. So, let's start over here. So this is Mandy. She's a registered nurse. All the names are probably fake names, as is common in this type of work, where you don't want confidentiality to be breached. So she is a DAS respondent, and she says that she has no problems with neighborhood segregation, and she justifies her position. She justifies segregation by saying people have a right to choose where and with whom they live. So she says, I think that people select a neighborhood to live in that they are similar to, and people, whatever similarities they find, it's race, economical level, religion, or whatever. When you're looking at somebody, you don't know what denomination they are or what political preference they have, but you can tell right off in race. I think they choose to live in a neighborhood that is their race. So this is abstract liberalism. Abstract liberalism because she's taking the ideas of choice and freedom and using it to justify social inequality. So let's look at naturalization. So let's look at Sarah, who is a student at MU, and how she explains away naturalization and segregation. She says, I don't really think it's segregation. I think people, spend time with people that they're like, not necessarily in color, but, their ideas and values, and, maybe their class has something to do with what they're used to, but I don't really think it's segregation. I don't think I would have trouble, approaching someone of a different race or color. I don't think it's a problem. It's just that the people that I do hang out with are just the people that I'm with all the time. They're in my organizations and stuff like that. So in this paragraph, we can see that she's explaining away segregation as natural. That the reason why maybe there aren't very many people of color in her friend group isn't because she's racist. It's because the organizations she attends just don't happen to have very many people of color. I'm sure that's how that works in lots of industries as well. Let's move on to another frame. some extent that's true, just from like looking at the black people that I've met in my classes and the few that I knew before college. Not like they're, I don't want to say waiting for a handout, but to some extent that's kind of what I'm like hinting at. Like almost like they feel like they were discriminated against hundreds of years ago. Now what are you gonna give me? You know, or maybe even it's just their background, that they've never like, maybe they're the first generation to be in college, so they feel like just that is enough for me. Yikes, yikes, yikes. Yikes, 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 yikes. Someone should read some George Lipschitz. Let's tap all of the words in this statement that are racist. We got one more frame left. Let's look at minimization of racism. So, let's look at this one. This is Joanne, another DAS respondent, and she says, I don't think it's as bad as it was. It probably needs improvement. What society needs is a knowledgeable crew, and I think that is the truth there. I think that the work will have to be done up continually until we're all one big happy family. The interviewer says, do you foresee that happening? And she says, it wouldn't surprise me. My great-granddaughter might marry a black. I don't know. I have no idea. Maybe just for future reference, don't refer to people as a black. Just a little tip. So this is a form of minimization of racism, because it's saying that, yes, there might still be discrimination, but it's probably a lot better than before. The more severe kind of this that Joanne doesn't use is maybe there was discrimination against people of color in the past, but now it's gotten so much better that we're actually discriminating against white people. LOL. So these are the 4 frames of colorblind racism that Eduardo Bonilla Silva discusses in his book. There's a lot more in there, and he even analyzes the Obama phenomenon in this new version. But that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for joining us. I hope you got some tingles. And maybe the next time something like this comes up and you feel a little bit uncomfortable, you'll be able to think of these 4 frames of colorblind racism, not take them too seriously, and become a more informed, compassionate, and happy person that's ready to fight for racial equality.